Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the LEA Special Education Point of Contact monthly webinar for April. Thank you so much for joining. I do see that a few people are still logging on and connecting for our meeting this morning. For those of you who are here and logged in, I want to draw attention to our handout section. You will find two handouts for this month's presentation. The first is a PDF version of the presentation that we will be going through. And the second is a OSSE Special Education Policy Bulletin for ESY services. And we encourage everyone to download both of these handouts so you can have a copy on hand to share with your staff as well at the conclusion of this call. And we will be getting started in just a moment. Okay, we're going to jump right in this morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Ingram, and I'm a program analyst here at OSSE. I am joined by my colleagues from many divisions across our organization, and we have a full agenda for you for our April webinar. We will start out with our policy reminder and updates. We will then transition into our IDA monitoring reminders and updates. We will hear from our non-public team, share announcements in that area, as well as from our SEDS team to share some updates that will be pertinent for your LEA. We will also transition into our child outcome summary, and we'll share some updates around there. We will also have updates from our transportation team, as well as close out with some announcements and reminders about upcoming professional development opportunities here at OSSE. I will turn it over this morning to share the policy reminder updates. Turn it over to Christy.
Good morning, everyone. This is Christy Weaver Harris. I'm the policy manager in OSSE's Division of K-12 Systems and Supports. Next slide. So 'tis the season for early access to students with disabilities data application. On April 28th, so next week, the early access to students with disabilities data application will go live with student information for the upcoming 21-22 school year. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is a click application that OSSE provides for LEAs to have access to special education information before that information is available in our typical data systems, which doesn't happen until you switch your LEA switches its data system over for the next school year. We can only see one school year's worth of data in most of our applications. If you're unfamiliar with Click, it is a data visualization tool. It has interactive reports and dashboards with like some charts and graphs. And what we do here is we take the special education information from SEDS and re-image it in Click so that you can access information for the students that are anticipated to enroll in your LEA next school year. So your user role in eSchool Plus will determine if you have access to a particular OSSE Click application in general, but specifically for the early access to students with disabilities data application, if you are of the following roles in eSchool Plus, you will have access. So if LEA data managers, heads of school, principals, special education points of contact, pre-K special education points of contact, and early childhood transition coordinators have access. Reach out to your LEA data manager if you need to update your role in eSchool Plus to ensure that you have access. Otherwise, I would encourage you to work with these points of contact within your school building or within your LEA to ensure that you either can have access to this information or that you can engage in the process around how this information is going to be used within your school building or your LEA. Next slide, please. So to give you an idea of what is actually available in the application, if you've never seen it before, this is something that has been around, I think, since like the 2015-16 school year. So we've been doing this for a couple of years. And every year we take a look at what information is available and see if there are any additional data points that may be helpful, or if there are some data points that are unnecessary. I can't remember a time we've ever removed data points, but every couple of years we add one. So the types of information that you can see within the CLIC application include at a student level, the student's like name and demographic information, including and then additional SEDS information such as like the primary disability category, their eligibility start and end dates, IEP start and end dates, their special education level, service hours information, including like the setting, time, and frequency of related services, the student's educational environment and least restrictive environment information, whether the student has a dedicated aide and what the hours are, transportation eligibility and mode, ESY eligibility, and if we say here IDEA Part C services, and by that I mean if a student is age 6 or under as of September 30th of the current year, and they have received in the past IDEA Part C services, there is a specific yes/no flag for every student for that, and that is to show you if the student may be a student who is transitioning from IDEA Part C services, that you may need to engage with the student's prior LEA to ensure a smooth and effective transition for that student for the upcoming school year. And new for this year, we are going to be showing you transportation eligibility for both the 2019-2020 school year and the 2020-2021 school year. Now, we are doing that to acknowledge that most LEAs have been in a remote posture for the majority or the entirety of the current school year. We understand that some students may have had their transportation eligibility status changed over the last year in acknowledgement that schools were operating remotely. So we want to give you information about whether the student was eligible for transportation in the last school year that was held mostly in person, so the prior school year. This is just to give you an indication of whether you may need to be reconsidering transportation eligibility for those students. It should just be a flag. We did do some data analysis here to see how many students had changes in their eligibility status for transportation for the current school year, and realized that it was a fairly high number that was worth us making this flag for you in this data application. So that is something to keep an eye out for, especially as you are planning to submit your TRFs over the summer and for the preparation for the next school year. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, there's a lot of ways that you can use this data, and this is just some of the user tips that OSSE has, but we've heard some really great input from LEA users and from school level users around how they use the information, and if anyone is interested in participating and in sharing your experience during our May 13th webinar, please feel free to reach out to me directly, or I will be reaching out to some folks to see if they would be interested in sharing their experience. So some of our tips here for how to use this data is really around preparedness for the next school year. So we want you to use this data to help guide your conversations around student needs and service preparations, especially considering shifts that have happened as part of school closures for COVID-19. We want you to take a look at staffing levels and student needs to see what training you may need to determine classroom cohorts. You can plan for dedicated aid allocations. We want you to be preparing to submit your TRFs. Planning and calendaring is especially helpful at this point in the school year and over the summer, so you can use this data to help with forecasting your meetings within the next school year by taking a look at when students are due for eligibilities or when they're due for IEP team meetings. You can also take a look at what students are new to your LEA here and coordinate with the student's prior LEA to make sure that you are getting any student information or student records that may not be automatically provided to you as part of OSSE's state level data systems. And I encourage you to establish relationships both with those previous LEAs in schools and with parents. You can use this information to reach out to parents for scheduling purposes, to discuss student needs. And we also have a reminder here that you should be regularly destroying any data that you export from this application. So the application has live enrollment data in it, which means that your student enrollment may change and is likely to change from day to day. If you export data from the system, that means if you're downloading it as an Excel spreadsheet or in any other format, we strongly encourage you to delete that data from your hard drive on a regular basis, because your enrollment information could change and you may have information about a student included in that data that for a student that is no longer enrolled in your LEA or will no longer be enrolling in your LEA. So make sure that you're regularly destroying that data. Like I said, it's live data, it updates every day. And I think we all know at the beginning, like right now, at this point in the school year, enrollment data is highly likely to change for at least some of our students. We know that it changes regularly over the course of the summer, and that sometimes this data isn't super accurate for who's actually going to show up in your school building until sometime in August or September. So please make sure you're regularly destroying that data to protect student privacy. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think I'm going to come back to something in just a second. So on March 24th, we again updated the IDEA Part B COVID guidance, essentially. We clarified some language that we had in there about student observations. So student observations may be conducted for determining eligibility for all eligibility categories. Student observations, but it is required as part of the eligibility determination for SLD. So student observations must be conducted in the child's learning environment, including the regular classroom setting, and that is IDEA language. Right now, the child's regular learning environment is remote. I think it is an IEP team decision as to whether an observation of a student remotely is helpful information for the purposes of determining eligibility. So I want to encourage LEAs and IEP teams to harness that authority to make that determination. If the student, whether they're being considered for SLD or for any eligibility category, if they can be validly and reliably observed via online, remote, virtual observation while you are undergoing remote instruction, like I said, the IEP team may determine that that is a sufficient means to inform the evaluation. So the point really that we were clarifying here is that student observations may be conducted as part of a eligibility determination for any disability category. We had heard some feedback that some of the language in there was a little unclear and that it seemed that it was only related to specific learning disability, but it may be conducted for any eligibility category. It must be conducted for SLD as part of the eligibility determination per IDEA requirements. So I'm going to drop in the chat a link to this document. It is not included as one of our handouts, but this is a document that has been evolving since its initial release in July 2020. We had a previous update in December, and we anticipate making another update. I won't say one more because we may update it again in the future, but we do anticipate another update to address recovery services. So be on the lookout for that, but I'm going to drop this in the chat right now so that you can find where that is, where this guidance is available on OSSE's website. Next slide, please. All right, so our slides got a little messed up. To access the early access CLIC application, these are the steps that are related to early access students with disabilities data. You have to obtain SLED credentials, receive CLIC access from OSSE, and then we have a webinar where we talked about this. I think it was in like May of 2018. That webinar is linked here. It is a recorded version of the May 2018 LEA SPED point of contact webinar. So it is one of these webinars that's recorded that goes over all this information. As I said, relevant POC types in the eSchool Plus list are automatically granted access to this. So you should already have SLED access, you should already have access to this. If you have trouble accessing this CLIC application or really any CLIC application, please use the OSSE support tool to troubleshoot those issues. Next slide, please. All right, as a reminder, it is also ESY season. The ESY certification deadline is Monday, May 3rd, 2021. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. We sent out to LEA heads of school, LEA special education points of contact, LEA data managers, and LEA transportation points of contact, the annual ESY memo. So that was sent via email from Victoria Glick. If you need any of those resources, please contact me directly and I can send you the information that went out. The ESY annual memo really just goes over your LEA level obligations for completing ESY certification. This year, usually that memo included both like programmatic information and operational information. This year we changed it so that there is now a standing guidance document related to the programmatic piece, and we are calling that a special education policy bulletin for ESY. That ESY policy bulletin is included as a handout for today's webinar. However, I want to draw your attention to the fact that this information is available on our website also under special education local policy guidance. I will drop a link to that in the chat too. That policy bulletin goes over programmatic requirements related to students transitioning between closing charters. There's information in there about charter funding, like there are a whole bunch of things. But if you have any questions related to ESY, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Again, speak within your LEA about the information that was communicated a couple weeks ago about the ESY annual memo, which also included the policy bulletin that was in there too. I think that's everything related to ESY. I'm going to drop that link in the chat, but as I said, you can also pull the policy bulletin itself straight from the handouts. Next slide, please. All right, that's everything from policy. I will take a look at the questions. We can address them at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to continue to put questions in if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. We are going to transition now to IDEA reminders and updates, and I'll turn it over to Karen.
Good morning, everyone. This is Karen Morgan Donaldson from IDEA Monitoring and Compliance. And we have some updates for you. Our next slide. So this slide provides an overview of monitoring that is taking place during this month of April. Update here is that OSSE will be releasing 2 reports today in DC CATS. IDEA monitors have completed their secondary transition requirement file reviews. You will receive a notification email from DC CATS that is automatically generated, and you will also receive an email from your IDEA monitor today notifying you that the initial report has been released. So please review your preliminary secondary transition findings in DC CATS, as you do have 30 days to appeal or ask for a rescission of these preliminary findings. We are also releasing the initial report for reevaluation timeliness. Again, you have 30 days to review these preliminary findings and verify your data. More on what this data verification looks like in DC CATS in a couple slides. Next slide, please. So due to changes in our reporting structure for specific conditions to OSSE, or the Department of Ed, OSSE has made a couple changes to its monitoring structure for secondary transition. In previous years, LEAs were placed in cohorts and reviewed on a quarterly basis. This year, OSSE reviewed a total of 200 files as a sample from all LEAs, so DCPS and DC charter schools, serving students ages 16 and older across Q2 and Q3 of this federal fiscal year. When we're talking about Q2 and Q3, we are talking about the dates of October 1, 2020 through March 30th, 2021. So we are looking at secondary transition plans, IEPs that were created for students 16 and older during this timeline. So anyone that serves students 16 and older will be represented in this poll. Next slide, please. So we also made one change to our reevaluation timeliness monitoring that really will only affect a few of our larger LEAs. If your LEA had 100 reevaluations take place, 100 or more, during the timeline of Q2, Q3, then OSSE will be taking a sampling approach to issuing findings to your LEA. So the purpose of this is purely to reduce the burden on LEAs so that they can focus on practicing compliance within their LEA and reducing the burden of these administrative tasks within DC CATS. Next slide, please. So this slide we went over at our last webinar, but I wanted to review it again. It shows what the verification of data looks like in DC CATS for reevaluation. The options are now, we hope, a little more straightforward. As you go through over the next 30 days and verify your data as to why your reevaluations were untimely, these are your options. You have LEA delay. This is if it was the LEA delay and nothing more. We also have student is no longer enrolled at the LEA. The LEA must submit documentation or evidence that the student withdrew. We have parental delay. The LEA must submit evidence of delay via communication logs. We have COVID-19 delay. LEA must have a PWN completed as written notice prior to the delay. And if you need clarification on that, you can reference our COVID guidance. And then request to appeal. This is if the reevaluation did take place timely, and this is a data error, whatever the reason might be, we are giving you the opportunity during the first 30 days of this, during the correction window, to appeal this preliminary finding. And just so you know, if parental delay, COVID-19, if you have enough evidence to demonstrate that these in fact are the reasons for delay, you will not receive a finding for those. Next slide, please. As I stated, LEAs have the opportunity to make an appeal for any preliminary finding that is issued in DC CATS. This slide gives you an idea of what this looks like. I just wanted to flag for you that we are in the process of working with our vendor, our DC CATS vendor, for updating what this looks like. So for the time being, some of the reports, it might say request appeal, a request for appeal, or request rescinded. Just so you know, either of these options will allow you to appeal the preliminary finding during the 30-day correction window. Next slide, please. So in exercising its monitoring responsibilities, OSSE must ensure that when it identifies noncompliance with the requirements of IDEA Part B, the noncompliance is corrected as soon as possible, but in no case later than 1 year after the identification of the noncompliance. OSSE uses a two-prong approach. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. We have our prong 1 and our prong 2 process. And next slide, please. This gives us a good overview of what this timeline looks like. We are reviewing this with you as we are today beginning the process for secondary transition and reevaluation. So this shows you a timeline for correction of noncompliance. OSSE will release initial findings or preliminary findings in DC CATS today. This starts the beginning of this process. LEAs have 30 days to verify its data and or make an appeal for proposed findings. So at the end of 30 days, OSSE monitors will review any evidence that LEAs uploaded into DC CATS. So if the evidence demonstrates that the LEA was not, in fact, non-compliant, then a finding will not be issued. So this is your opportunity to tell us, if you want to appeal, tell us why your reevaluations were untimely, et cetera. All other proposed findings will become findings. So once at the end of the correction window, we will release the final report. And this is when the 365-day timeline begins. If you do not go in and appeal, or if you do not go in and verify your data for reevaluation, please know that all of the files in the non-compliance report in DC CATS will in fact turn into findings. Once findings are issued, LEAs have 90 days to complete the prong 1 process in DC CATS. And then once prong 1 is completed, prong 2 report is populated in DC CATS, and LEAs have 30 days to engage in the prong 2 process. So right now we are kind of in the process of closing out prong 1 and prong 2 for previous reports. We are reviewing this with you today. Also to just let you know that again, today, 2 reports will be released in DC CATS. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of how many files you need to submit for prong 2. Gives you a breakdown of how many files are required per number of files flagged for non-compliance. Okay, next slide, please. This gives you an overview, and again, this is a review for how exactly you complete the prong 2 process. You identify student files for OSSE to review. The files for submission must be newer than the reporting period that was monitored. For example, if your LEA was flagged for an untimely initial eligibility in the initial eligibility quarter 2 report, we ask that you identify student files that were from the period for eligibility that occurred after that report, so after January 1st, 2020. We ask you to go into DC CATS and provide the student information for your OSSE monitor to review. So again, you are providing your prong 2 files for us to review purely by giving us the Universal Student Identification Number in DC CATS in the prong 2 report. Again, this is your LEA's opportunity to demonstrate the work that you are doing to correct on a systemic level areas of non-compliance. If you have questions about prong 2, we have a couple more slides on it, but you can always reach out to your LEA monitor. Our next slide. So if you're unsure exactly what prong 2 looks like in DC CATS, we do have a tutorial in this link in this presentation. We'll give you a quick rundown. It's a short video that the vendor for DC CATS created for us on how exactly you go in and enter the students for us to review. And our next slide. So the question is that we've been getting, are there any tools that can assist with file selection for prong 2? And yes, there are, specific to initial evaluation and reevaluation in C2B. OSSE encourages LEAs to utilize the LEA Performance and Planning Report, which is part of the enterprise reporting system, which is, you can access that via SLED. Now, the big question we are getting right now is, what if we don't have any timely files to submit for prong 2 due to COVID? So LEAs can submit students that have a PWN that was completed at an appropriate time in the process that outlines efforts that made that they tried to complete the initial evaluation or reevaluation timely. So a student that has a PWN completed can be submitted as a prong 2, as evidence for prong 2 to close out prong 2. Now, this is only the case if you don't have any timely reevaluations or initial evaluations to submit. Next slide. This slide just gives you an outline of the reports that are coming due in DC CATS. So these are the reports where we are coming up on 365-day timeline. So the next report that is coming up is due June 10th, and that is initial evaluation quarter 2 and reevaluation quarter 2. So you will be hearing from your IDEA monitor shortly with an overview of any reports that you still have open. So please keep a lookout for an email from your IDEA monitor, please. And then our next slide this slide outlines, excuse me, all of our monitoring and technical assistance in the area of IDEA Part B for the remainder of this year. We are currently, as I said, releasing secondary transition and reevaluation timeliness monitoring reports today in DC CATS. And we continue to move forward with select LEAs for targeted technical assistance in the area of initial evaluation, reevaluation, and C2B transition, with a focus on students ages 3 to 5. Coming up in May, we are looking at significant discrepancy and disproportionate representation monitoring, as well as child find monitoring. And then in July and August, we will continue with targeted technical assistance. And then we will be issuing identification of significant disproportionality. And then July initial evaluation and C2B transition monitoring will take place as well. In August of this year, we will be issuing our IDEA LEA determinations, which is your LEA's report card, more or less, for federal fiscal year 2019. If you have any questions related to any of the slides I just reviewed, please feel free to put it in the questions box, and I will be monitoring that. But that is it for now for updates for IDEA monitoring and compliance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. We will now transition to Sharon to provide us with some non-public updates.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Powell. I'm an education program specialist with the non-public monitoring team, which falls under the division of K-12 systems and supports. The non-public monitoring team would like to take this opportunity to remind LEAs, particularly LEAs with a student or students placed in a non-public school or program, that the LEA, as you can see here under the first bullet, remains responsible for compliance with IDEA Part B while a student attends a non-public school, so a private entity. And then we'd also like to take this opportunity to flag for you that a number of non-public schools have recently returned to in-person instruction or have plans to return to in-person instruction in the near future. Please note that it is OSSE's expectation that LEAs are regularly communicating with your non-public points of contact and are aware of these changes in operating status and are adjusting your support and monitoring activities accordingly. Okay, so that was short and sweet. I think that's it from the non-public monitoring team at this time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or your designated OSSE monitor. So that would either be, or your OSSE non-public monitor. So that would either be Miss Tony Lemons or Miss LaShonda Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We will now transition to Rita to provide us with some SEDS updates.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. Good morning, everyone. This is Rita Larkins from the CIO's office at OSSE, and I'm going to be going over some pretty exciting SEDS updates. Next slide. Okay. So we know that there have been issues in the past with people having access to fax machines during this time of COVID. So what we have done, we've just talking a little bit about the current process. Right now, everybody's current process for adding or documenting Medicaid parental consent, you're using the Easy Fax process, the fax machine, to actually fax in your document. We realize that access to fax machines has been an issue, and we want to definitely consider those current situations. So what we've done is we have worked with the vendor to create a workaround for the Medicaid parental consent form. Next slide. In this workaround, this is really a manual process. So let me just walk through those steps in completing the manual process of creating the Medicaid consent event. So you will actually be able to now navigate to the student's personal page. This will be restricted based on user type. So the SEC role and the LEA data administrator, those two roles will have access, excuse me, to that student personal page. As you navigate to the bottom of the page, you will see the parental consent to bill Medicaid. And that's actually a box or 2 boxes to allow you to enter the signature and begin dates from the physical form that you've collected or from the parent. Next slide. Okay, so you're going to confirm that Medicaid consent and create the event by entering the signature date and also using the drop down for the parent response. So you can, the drop down will have yes, no, or yes one time. And then you will also be able to enter a begin date when those dates are not in alignment. So if it's not the same date, you have the Medicaid consent begin date. You want to also make sure that you have checked that box, and that's basically confirming that signature date. And then you will update the database to save all those changes. Next slide. What this will actually do is you are manually creating an event in that student's history page. So you'll see, and you'll see it here in the slide, that we now have that purple line, which indicates the Medicaid parental consent. But what you'll notice is that there's no document attached to it. So this workaround is a 2-part process. So you'll create the event, and now the next step is you will attach the actual document to the event. Next slide. So to do this, you will go to the student's document page and you'll go to the cover sheet. And what you want to do is create that OSSE Medicaid parental consent cover sheet so that you can, you're using that to create the final. You're really creating a place to store that form, okay? So you'll create the final. Next slide. And then this will allow you on the documents page to upload the actual document that you have. So you'll navigate to the documents page and see that OSSE Medicaid parental consent form cover sheet document that we created. And then you'll click upload external attachments. Next slide. Once you go to the upload external attachments page, this will allow you to associate the attachment with the correct document. So you'll select that, again, that OSSE Medicaid parental consent form cover sheet. And then from your desktop or your file share, wherever you're storing that form, you can now upload that document and it will be attached to that consent cover sheet. So you'll be able to see that now on the Documents tab, and it's complete once you see the date received and the attachment that's associated with that form. Next slide. Okay, so that's it for me on the, thank you. That's it for me on the actual process of how you will create this manual consent event. Couple of takeaways here. Every role will not have access to that student's personal page. So again, that's the SEC, the Special Ed Coordinator role, and also your LEA data administrators. If you have questions or if you run into any issues, I encourage you to create an OSSE ticket. It'll get routed to me and I'll be able to help you if you have any issues or if you have questions, you can go ahead and submit those in your chat box. Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rita. And just to confirm, this is now live in SEDS.
So this will, thank you for that. This will be live starting next week.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions for Rita, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we are going to transition to Dawn to provide us with some child outcome summary updates.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dawn Hilton, the 619 coordinator with OSSE, Department of K-12. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about child outcome summaries, and I would like to share some helpful tips with you to help you navigate entering exit data for your students. Next slide, Tiffany. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. All right. So as a reminder, cost exit data is due on June 1st, 2021, and it must be submitted in DC CATS. LEAs should collect and report cost exit data for every pre-kindergarten student with an IEP who is exiting pre-K special education program by the end of this current school year. So this includes students who will be participating in kindergarten during next school year, any students who are turning age 6, children who exit preschool special education. So that means the IEP team came together and decided that that child no longer requires special education services. And then any student who is relocating outside of the LEA, I'm sorry, outside of the state. So keeping that in mind, if that child will be transferring into a different DC charter school or DCPS, you would leave that record open in DC CATS. However, if that student is moving out of state, or the parent has decided to keep the child at home, or the child is going to a private school, you would close that record in DC CATS. So you would submit exit scores. Things to just keep in mind when adding information into DC CATS. When you look at the DC CATS record and you are reviewing your list of students, one thing you will notice is each student has a status next to their name. So if you notice that the student has a status of incomplete exit score, what that really means in DC CATS is at some point your team added entry data. It does not necessarily mean that exit scores are due immediately. So keep that in mind when you're looking at a student. If it says incomplete exit scores, keep in mind the age of that student, whether or not that student will be going into kindergarten or if that student has left your LEA and moved out of state. Otherwise, if that child will remain in pre-K for next year, that record should remain open, and the status will continue to say that incomplete exit scores. Once you have entered exit data for children who are moving on, you will notice a status of entry and exit scores are complete. And that is your indication that your team has submitted exit data and the record is now locked. If at any point you or your team incorrectly enter exit data, so you mistakenly put it in for a student who will remain in pre-K next year, or you put incorrect data in DC CATS and you need to change it, you cannot personally go into DC CATS to change the record because the record is locked. However, you can contact me at my email, dawn.hilton1@dc.gov, or you can email ossie.cosfaq@dc.gov, and just let us know that the record is locked and you need to get into the record, and we will be able to unlock that record and you can access it again. So just let us know. It's a quick, easy fix, but that's something that we need to be aware of so we can help you with that. Another thing that happens when people are adding exit data or you may not be able to find a student that you're looking for in your current list of children. But when you enter that student's ID, DC CATS will alert you, informing you that that student does exist in your LEA. That is typically an indication that that child's record was closed a previous school year. So if you look at your home page in DC CATS, in the top right corner, you will be able to change the school year. If you switch the school year and look at the previous school year, you may be able to find that student. Again, if you're having problems and you've tried to switch the school year and you still can't locate that student, contact me or the COS email, and I will be able to assist you with that. I have a few more tips that I hope help you with this process. Another thing to remember is if a student leaves your LEA mid-year, you have to submit exit scores in DC CATS. Again, leaving mid-year would indicate that they left the state, or parents are homeschooling the student, or they went to a private school. If that child went to another DC LEA, that record will remain open, and that new LEA has to request a transfer of records. So if you are the LEA point of contact in DC CATS, please remember to check transfer request, because the system will not alert you that another LEA has requested a record. So you want to just get in the habit of looking to see if records have been requested. If at any time you are not getting a response for a transfer of records from an LEA, again, you can contact me. I can follow up with that LEA and then make sure that record is transferred to you. If you have any other questions about exit data or the DC CATS and COS, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, the exit scores can be entered immediately because they are due on June 1st. And that's it for me, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Dawn. We will now transition to our transportation team to provide some updates.
Good morning, everyone. Douglas Johnson here with OSSE DOT. Tiffany, you can go to the next slide. So we know ESY is approaching, and I saw your question in the box, Julie. Thank you for the suggestions. However, ESY has been the same date every year over the years. So we have been making adjustments for everyone due to COVID. So yes, we may have a standing date. However, we are, working with, LEAs and everything of that nature. So thank you for the suggestions. But back to the slide here. In preparation of ESY 2021, there are some important items that schools should know to have, and it has to be accurate when it comes to calendar information. And that's, comes with us scheduling students to get to school on time with pickups and things of that nature, and also their correct cohorts. If you have more than one cohort at your school, we need to make sure that the students that are eligible for transportation have the correct cohort, because we don't want to route them to the wrong days of the week. And to understand that if that does happen, any changes that the school may request, it doesn't happen immediately. We have to investigate and research the route to make sure that it won't impact any changes if the school times are wrong, anything of that nature. Anytime that you may have put the wrong information in the system and we already routed the students, we have to do our research first before any changes are made. So that's why the accurate information is important. Also, accurate information when it comes to the student. Ensure that you verify the address, and sometimes when it comes to, I know with DCPS mostly, when it comes to ESY, they may not be at their home school. So they may be at another location for ESY. So make sure that they have the correct location that they will be attending ESY based on their IEP information of how the schools are being set up for ESY. And also just making sure what will happen is if we have inaccurate information, meaning that if you risk not having that student attend that first day of school, or having issues where we have to resubmit a transportation request that can delay their in-person learning. Next slide, please, Tiffany. Thank you. And also the guidelines for ESY 2021, they're not different than the ones that we had for SY 2021. And that's just, the data submission and transportation preparation. You'll see the process steps and the owner of those particular steps. The school will submit the counter information, and they will, create an INTO. And if there are any issues, you'll reach out to the data team, and also submit transportation request forms for those students. And when it comes to the transportation side of things, OSSE DOT will be involved with verifying the data and making sure the system is set up, and routing development, and Q&A, the Q&A process that we'll handle. So after you submit a transportation request, we still reach out to the parents as well once we have routed them to make sure, that all this information is correct through the verification process. If not, and we find out that there's an error, we'll reach back out to the person that created that particular transportation request form, so we can have that student information submitted in a correct manner, so they can be routed properly. And again, if you know your in-person date, please submit that, as soon as possible. Once we do have the system available for you for ESY, and this is submitted as soon as you have that concrete information that your school will be hosting ESY in person, or if you decide to have it virtually, you can let us know that as well, so we can be aware of your situation. Next slide, please. And the important aspect when you create your calendar is the person's the start date. And so we need that in-person date to help us out with, letting us know how much staff we need for that particular route, or when, how many schools may be starting around the same time for staffing purposes, and also just for routing purposes as well. Especially when, we'll have people submitting transportation requests weeks in advance. And also sometimes we have schools that may say they start on a particular date, but then they change up that date. So we want to just make sure if a school does go on hold or pause with in-person learning, that we have that next in-person start date, so we can have those dates match what you gave us in our tote system and also in our routing system. So that in-person start date is very key. And next slide, Tiffany. Thank you. And training dates. These are the remaining training dates that we have for TOTE. Again, if you have any new team members at your respective LEA and you'd want to get that person trained before the dates that we have available and remaining, please reach out to the data team, and we'll make some time for that person one-on-one to assist them with the training. And if you have any questions, just always, you can reach out to the TOTE support team via email or telephone. We'll be there from answering the phones from 9 to 5 p.m. and the number is 202-576-5520. Again, just give us, some time to respond to you. We are receiving your emails. We will get back to you in a decent time, but we do have an increase in, emails and phone calls with people having questions with returning students, and also with, schools that are just starting in person for the remainder of this particular school year here. So just give us some time to get back to you with your request or question, and I promise you we'll get back to you in a timely manner. That's all the information I have, and if you, like I say, always reach out to us if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Doug. Just a few announcements to share. I want to turn it to Christy to get some of our LEA's feedback. I will say we are almost at time, but we really want you to stay on to hear this last bit of information and, of course, provide your feedback to us. I'll hand it over to Christy to share what's on this slide and what we need our LEA's feedback on.
Hi guys, so OSSE has been thinking about the administrative work and the burden that is put on LEAs for re-entry and a return to in-person instruction. We've been wondering how OSSE can support you with that administrative work. So if OSSE can provide you with additional administrative supports, would that be helpful? If there's any supports that you can think of, or if you have feedback on this, please go ahead and put your answers either in the chat or in the questions box, whichever is easier for you, and we will review them and take them into consideration as OSSE plans our supports for a return to in-person instruction. Thank you.
Perfect. I just have one announcement from our teaching and learning team. We want to share that our Secondary Transition Institute will be May 11th through the 14th, and registration information will be coming soon. We encourage you to, those LEAs who are serving students where you are creating those secondary transition plans, we would love for you to participate in this institute. We ask that you clear your calendars and look to see how you can participate within this span of time. You will get information very, very soon on how to register, but we encourage your participation in the Secondary Transition Institute for this school year. In addition, you will be hearing soon from our teaching and learning team around the summer 2021 professional development opportunities. Please ensure that you are subscribed to the Teaching and Learning PD Bulletin that goes out monthly. Again, this presentation is in the handouts where you'll be able to actually click to subscribe and download all the information that are on each of these slides that our presenters reviewed today. In addition, we always have our webinars uploaded to our OSSE website within 7 days of this webinar. You'll be able to watch all the previous webinars as well as download any training or resource materials that were covered in past months. Our next SPED webinar will be on May 19th at 10 a.m. We encourage you to participate as we would love to have you here. I know there are many things, updates that our teams provide in these webinars as well. We would love to see you next month. And of course, we would love your feedback for this month's survey. So I will hold on this screen for folks to screenshot on their phones and scan the QR code to complete the survey for this month. I know we are close to time, but I want to be able to answer some of the questions that are that's in the Q&A in our question box. So I want to turn over to Christy to see if there are any questions that maybe you've seen in the chat that may be helpful to the group overall to have those answers provided.
Sure, I'm going to do a quick rundown of some of the questions. We got a question around resources for ESY calendars and eSchool Plus. If you go to OSSE's Office of Data Management and Applications website, if you Google OSSE ESY calendar guide, you'll be able to find what I'm referring to. But on OSSE's Office of Data Management and Applications website, there are a bunch of resources that are listed by school year, and one of those resources is the 21-22 ESY and summer school calendar guide. If you have any further questions about how to input that kind of information, please reach out to your LEA data liaison. We also got a question around how to complete ESY certification, and this is a frequent flyer question for us. So the steps that are outlined in that chart that I showed earlier are really what we're talking about for ESY certification. Completion of eligibility determinations and SEDS, so both ESY services eligibility and ESY transportation eligibility, completion of TRFs for eligible students, inputting your ESY calendars and your site locations, and assigning site locations to students. So many, many years ago, there was a final certification or confirmation form that you had to submit. That is no longer the practice. We do not have like a final, hey, OSSE, I've done all the things that you've asked me to do. Basically, we're just asking you to make sure that you're making these decisions in a timely manner. We do understand that this is, especially this year, is a weird time, really. And making ESY determinations, especially like site locations and things like that, and not having the data that you need, or not really being sure that the data that you have is fully informative about a student, we definitely understand. ESY certification is not something that OSSE has monitoring around. We are really just asking that you are making these determinations in a timely manner to ensure that students can receive the services that they're entitled to, that your IEP teams are determining appropriate for those students. And from an OSSE perspective, the really important thing that we need from you are the TRFs so that we can do routing in time to get the students there, which is why DOT is asking for either the first Monday in May or within 20 days of the first day of ESY. I recognize that every year ESY kind of feels like this really big undertaking because it is a lot of work for IEP teams, and that the ESY certification process, like the actual administrative work for certification, can be a little confusing. I think that at this point, the requirements of the policy say that we have to do it by the first Monday in May, but make sure that you're making those determinations as soon as possible and in service of the students. Let me look. Yeah, if you already, related to the Medicaid cover sheet, if you have already created a cover sheet, you can attach the document to that cover sheet. And again, this feature will be live on Monday, April 26th. I think that's all of the questions that we have to address right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Christy. Of course, we would love your feedback on this webinar. I will leave this code here for a second longer. Again, you can expect this webinar, the recording, as well as the presentation with the documents we've referenced during today's chat to be included and uploaded into our OSSE website within the next 7 days. If you have any additional questions, we do see folks in the chat. Feel free to reach out to, I will share our contact information here by discipline. If you have anyone that you may have an outstanding question for after this call, these are ways to get in contact with the team here at OSSE. We thank you everyone for your participation this morning, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Enjoy the rest of your day.